Hello, welcome to the Theology Pugcast. It's great to have you with us for another show. And today we got a special guest, and we're going to introduce her in just a moment. But in case you're wondering who I am C.R. Wiley, the senior pastor of the Presbyterian Church of Manchester in Manchester, Connecticut. I've taught philosophy at the college level, and I've written a bunch of stuff. So enough about me. Tom.
Tom Price, a systematic theologian, Christian ethicist, teaching both at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary and also teaching philosophy and other things at various locations, which I will not disclose.
Glenn.
And I'm Glenn Sunshine. I'm a professor of early modern European history at Central Connecticut State University and a senior fellow at the Colson Center for Christian Worldview. I also have another book coming out probably later this month, actually.
Wow.
On political theology, published through Canon Press. It will be called Leviathan Reborn.
Okay. So
it's changed the name again.
Okay, but it's on Protestant resistance theory. So.
That's one of the big themes in it. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Well, good stuff. Well, anyway, for those of you who are regulars, you know that we had been recording our show by Zoom for a long time, and we finally got back to a pub a few weeks ago, and now we're back on Zoom. It's not because we've been kicked out of the pub. It's because we've got a friend who's with us today from Chicago, and it would be hard for her to commute and be with us at our pub. So we're going to have a time with her via Zoom, but we all have drinks. So at least that much is the same. And it's Rachel Fulton Brown, and she's holding up. What do you got there, Rachel?
Water. But it's no, it's the fancy stuff that my brother likes from Mexico, right? Now I forget what it's called.
So
it's fizzy.
Fizzy, yeah, it's got little bubbles in it, so that's good.
Yeah.
Anyway, Rachel Fulton Brown teaches at the University of Chicago. She's an associate professor of history there. And Rachel and I met a couple years ago. We were both speakers at the Touchstone conference out in Chicago. And we didn't know each other before that, but we met at the conference. And Rachel had a friend with her that was kind of a fascinating person to meet, for me anyway. It's Milo. And I will let you talk a little bit more about Milo in a minute. But Rachel gave a great talk on Mary and themes related to her in medieval Christianity. And I talked about basically Virgil and the Aeneid and piety and stuff like that. But anyway, we met each other at that time, and I, based on that initial connection, we became friends on Facebook, and so it's been great to kind of keep that relationship going a little bit. And one of the things that Rachel is really into is Tolkien, and she's got a new video series called The Forge of Tolkien, and that's really what we kind of want to zero in on today. But before we do that, I thought it'd be kind of fun to talk a little bit about Milo and your relationship with him, and I know you got a book about that relationship. So fill us in.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you for having me. And one day you usually meet at a pub, right? We could be Inklings, and we're gonna have to we're gonna have to try harder, I think, to end up at that pub. But I'm very grateful to get to be here on Zoom in 2020, whatever. I heard someone talking about it. Actually, one of my fellow, he does live streams, and I do. My videos are pre-recorded on unauthorized. But one of my fellow live streamers talking about 2020 is the year of perfect vision. So
right.
I hope I have better vision now than I did maybe 4 years ago. But so I'm happy to get to talk just a little bit about Milo. This is the book that we published last December. November, December came out. But today that we're recording is a very significant anniversary. I wrote to Milo and it's in the book, right? September 17th, 2016. But the first blog post that I wrote in which I mentioned him, and that was like this big sort of breakthrough for me, was September 29th, 2016, right? And today is, of course, the feast of St. Michael the Archangel. And, in English terms, right, that'd be the beginning of Michaelmas term and the beginning of the academic year. So there's always lots of like symbolic layers and whatever is going on with me, and it seems with Milo too. And but with reflecting on what it was like 4 years ago right? 2016, the reason I was writing about it, the reason I started writing about Milo and the reason I was sort of intrigued by his campus tour was we had just at the University of Chicago had the deans of the college and the dean of students send out a letter saying we would not have safe spaces on campus at the University of Chicago. Well, you know, as they say, fast forward to 2020, and as far as I can tell, we're just as safe a spaces everywhere else, right? I back in 2016, you know, we were the ones standing bold for academic freedom and say, come here and wrestle with ideas and be challenged. Now I'm on leave again, so I'm a little, you know, I'm not really participating in whatever they're doing. But they had the welcoming ceremony for the students virtually.
Really?
And I think, you know, I think it's lovely that we get to speak on Zoom. I think it's great. You know, it's like doing the Tolkien videos and you know, live streaming. I learned a lot from watching live streams that helped me with my Zoom class in the spring, which I did my Tolkien class. But to imagine that we can accomplish the same kind of education virtually as we do in person, and that's a sacrifice we're willing to make for something that I think is pretty imaginary, is very interesting. So I'd love to talk. I can keep going, but you maybe want to focus me a little more.
Yeah, that's great. In fact, we share your convictions about the imaginary crisis.
Oh my gosh, it's so and so I'm on the Forge of Tolkien, right? It's like you thought you were dangerous talking to me because I'm friends with Milo. So 2016, right? So no, the other people.
Maybe for some of our folks who maybe are not familiar with Milo and his persona and so
sure.
forth, why don't you fill us in a little bit on him?
Okay, so the book again is the Milo Chronicles, and it's blog posts that I wrote about Milo from 2016 through 2019 through last year. He was, if you're not quite clear about who he is just by name, you will have heard of the Berkeley riot in February 2017, right? Which was the sort of 6-month mark after I'd started writing about him, that he was on a tour on college campuses giving talks mainly about, you know, he was stumping for Trump at that point, right? So it was a little bit political, but he was mainly talking about cultural issues, right? Feminism, his slogan was "Feminism is cancer," which it developed out of a tweet poll that he did. Like, would you rather your child have feminism or cancer? And cancer won, right? He also talked. He talked about religious questions, like the differences between Christianity and Islam. He talked about the last talk that he was able to give before Antifa blew up at Berkeley. And canceled his talk there. The last significant talk he was able to give in that tour was against abortion.
Really?
That one was called "No More Dead Babies."
Yeah.
So, I mean, the thing is, it's all still really topical, right? If you think about it's like, have we moved on from 2016? Well, we're sort of this intensified moment. Now, not only are we not allowed to speak on campus, things like maybe feminism actually has backfired in very important ways on both women and men, but we're not even allowed to speak, right? It's like without covering our faces, it's this incredible intensification. So, you know, it's interesting that with the Supreme Court nomination that was just announced, we're going to have to think about what abortion means really seriously. And Milo has always been just adamant on that issue. Austin Ruse, Catholic writer, wrote a very nice piece on Milo after February 2017 is the big deal, right? The Berkeley riot. I write a piece for the University of Chicago Divinity School newsletter about the significance of the Berkeley riot and the sort of crisis that I saw us in that was manifested in the response to Milo's talks of, it's a religious crisis, right? It's a crisis of, I said, you know, an inability to actually think through the theological underpinnings of our culture, right? Well, that got me condemned by the Divinity School for not being diverse enough.
That's right.
You know, that was hilarious, and that I think you were sort of more aware of that, Chris, by the time I got to Touchstone, right? Because this was a year and a half. Touchstone was a year and a half after that. But my Divinity School article came out on a Thursday. The following Monday, the political hit was, you know, a achieved against Milo that made him lose his entire career, right? Accusing him of promoting the thing that he had been a victim of, which, you know, is a very, I mean, he's gay and was abused as a adolescent by a priest. Right. And that's, Chris, you met me at Touchstone right when he had just written the book about that experience. And one of the things that he was interested in coming to the conference for was to meet Lee Podol's, who actually did a blurb for the book. Right. And we also talked to Tony Easelin and obviously quite a few others. Robbie George was there as well. And, you know, and the Touchstone conference was on patriarchy, right? On fatherhood and the need for strong fathers. And my talk wasn't actually about Mary. It was, I talked about God the Father, right? And that, you know, was an interesting meditation for me, trying to understand why that sort of devotion hadn't really been the feature in even my own studies. Like the Our Father is one of the prayers of the Rosary, but I hadn't really thought that through fully. So Milo and I have been tangled up in all of these religious, cultural, academic sort of controversies now for 4 years.
Yeah. Well, you know, my impression of Milo from a distance, you know, I didn't follow him at all closely, but he struck me as being, you know, a really savvy and flamboyant figure. And I was actually pleasantly surprised at a couple of things when I met him. One is his knowledge of Christianity. I just didn't know that he was as conversant. But the other thing is that he's really seems like a decent person and easy to talk to, and struck me as a guy who was actually interested in listening to other people say things. Mm-hmm. So those were great to see. A couple of great things to see.
I'm happy to hear it, right? Because it's easy. No, it's easy to have this. I mean, that was what the original sort of and I think this continues to be an issue, right? Not just for Milo, but my original curiosity about him was aroused by that. You know, he had been here in Chicago at DePaul in the spring before I started writing to him. And, you know, he'd been shouted off stage, right, by Black Lives Matter activists. And, you know, the past is the present kind of feeling that the DePaul police officers had been told to stand down and not interfere with that protest of Milo's talk, right? So I was somewhat aware of him, and I was curious, right? And it, you know, as a scholar, surely the thing you do is, I hear these bad things about, you know, the Inquisition, or I hear these bad things about usury and money lending, or, you know, that's a bad thing. Or I hear these, you know, bad things about, you know, other religions or something like that. Well, is your response to, you know, scream and yell and refuse to look, or is it go read another book? Right. And that we're now in this world where we can do these videos, right? And you can, you know, not just have conversations in a pub that then you go write about, but record the conversation in a pub, share that out. Why not go and watch a lot of videos of someone and see whether or not what you've heard in the grapevine or in the national media is true? And I started watching, and I realized, okay, so there's an act, right? And that's in the book has this mask on the cover, right? It's the mask. That what I saw, when we're all about masks right now, right? Right. But I saw was Milo wearing this big giant gold mask, which was a performance in order to get people to listen to the arguments that he was making, and, you know, the sort of rhetoric and the dialectic that are always playing out. I didn't tell you who my other dangerous people are. So Milo is as dangerous as you found, right? Not. So I trust you'll be willing to look up some of the people that I'm on unauthorized with. The one that I mentioned, I heard the 2020 thing on, was Owen Benjamin's live stream. He's gone through a big journey, right, over the last several years, some of which I've been less like not sympathetic to, but taken by in the sort of emotional moment, right? But, you know, he set up this. He's living out homesteading. He used to be a like Hollywood actor. He had the same agent as Jordan Peterson did, like the CAA. I think he was signed by them. I hope that's right. But he stepped away from all of it, right? Because he didn't want to the take the ticket, right? He didn't want to pay the price that meant selling his soul to be able to be famous. And that has kept, just like for Milo, I mean, Milo refused to take that ticket a number of times. And I've written about it a lot in Milo Chronicles, you know, the numbers of times that people thought they could buy him. And he comes out with saying something that, oh my gosh, how could you possibly say that? Like Robert
Right. Mercer,
right? When he was funding Milo, and then Milo was saying stuff that Mercer found divisive. And it's like, well, if you're going to speak truth, you're going to upset people because you're telling them things that are hard to hear because they need to hear them. Like you're drinking too much, right? That's a real winner.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
You know,
Just don't say that today.
right. Well, or you know, maybe you shouldn't be cheating on your wife, right? Or this is the hardest one for people to hear from Milo. It's like maybe, you know, homosexuality isn't like the perfect lifestyle.
Right.
And that's how he, you know, I was first aware of him from Chadwick Moore writing an article about him for one of the gay glossies. And, you know, Chadwick basically lost his job after that for, you know, like not demonizing Milo, because Milo was, you know, saying, look, some of the stuff that the LGBT movement says is harmful to people. And, you know, so you come in and you say stuff like that and you call divisive. Well, Owen Benjamin said similar things that got him thrown out. And now he's homesteading in Idaho, right? and you know, raising his kids, and he's built this community of people around him. They call them bears, right? And so since I, on my blog, am Fencing Bear, I'm an honorary bear, right? Although Owen and I just did live stream last week, and I've been line as a bear longer than he has, even though he's been a bear for a long. So we're both bears, right? And the bears are collecting around, and they're making art, they're making businesses, they're, you know, learning to garden, they're, you know, how do we build the culture up? It's a real Tolkien. We're going to get to Tolkien, right? That's why Fox Day, who is Owen's friend, and they set up Unauthorized together, asked me first to do a medieval history series, which you can see on Unauthorized, but also to do the Forge of Tolkien, because they want their channel to be about building culture, right? It's not about sitting around moaning about, you know, those crazy leftists or, you know, the secular world, or it's Christian, but it's about. And this is why I was absolutely delighted to be asked to do the Forge of Tolkien, right, which is about where you make stuff, right? And the first episode is on that metaphor of Tolkien's invitation to subcreate, and the forge being the place, like at Smith of Wootton Major, making both useful and beautiful things, right? So it's the my series. I mean, one, it's sympathetic to the whole project of Unauthorized, and Unauthorized has other channels too. We're on gardening and comics. There's a really popular one on comics. Barcelona Life. Some of Vox's friends talk about what it's like living in Spain. You know, so the idea is we're here for literature, we're here for home, we're here for stories, we're here for theology and history and sort of building culture.
You know, these themes are all things that we're very much engaged with it as well, and we really are glad to have you on the show. And we want to get into the Forge a little bit, but I wanted to see if maybe Tom and Glenn had sort of some thoughts that maybe you can respond to, Rachel, based on what you've just talked about a little bit. Tom, you have anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, a couple things. Well, I remember those events with Milo. Actually, I don't know how I was watching it with my wife, but I remember saying way back when, I was actually very glad to see someone take that kind of stance in that kind of increasingly disgusting environment, if you will. And one of the things I think I remember when that event happened, because I was finishing up my doctoral work in Oxford, probably 2006, 2007. I kind of took my time over there, traveled a bit. But I remember all these ideas floating around, and I remember people kind of trying to put them to okay academic use, you know. But then something shifted by the time I got out and started raising my kids, and you know, I was teaching adjunct only, still am actually. So I didn't have my I wasn't involved in, the day-to-day of the university. So I saw something rapidly shift. And I even remember telling my wife, I said, you watch what's happening on campus right here. And the way in which, people of integrity are cowering to this almost like childlike behavior of these people demanding their viewpoint not be challenged. This is going to spread to the streets very quickly, and now we're really there. But I mean, I remember really the day. It was actually when I think Milo was at Berkeley. I think that was the event when they were having all this, people disrupting his speech and stuff. I think it happened to Ben Shapiro and different characters as well. And yeah, this increasing intelligence. But I'm talking from the time. I mean, I knew critical race theory. All this stuff had been floating around for ages, and you knew how to digest it as an intellectual and find out, okay, what little semblance of something was okay in it, and then put it in a larger, philosophical or theological frame. But now it's taken as a dogma. Mm-hmm. It's not contested, and you have, all the way up to the highest powers, you have people not wanting to allow this kind of dogma to be challenged in any sense of the word. It's the most extreme fundamentalism from the top of powers down. How in the world did we get, just in your opinion, from 2006 or 7 to now to where that became so incredibly dominant and has taken someone like Milo, which would have been a favorite of most universities, to where marginalized and demonized?
Well, of the many things that happened with me in the story with Milo is I converted to Catholicism. I'm sorry, Chris.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. We've got lots of Catholic friends, and
I in fact grew up Presbyterian, right?
Right.
So and that's I've done a lot of videos. If you look on my blog on Bear on Air, I have links to all my videos, and the Catholics have all wanted to talk to me about how I converted. That I now understand this. The other dangerous person I've talked to is I did some videos with E. Michael Jones recently. And that's why I had usury on the mind, because I was reading his economic theory in Bear and Metal. And I understand now one thing. The medievalists have gone as nuts in my, in academia as pretty much everybody else, because, that's my story, right? That they decided I was all of the right labels. Fascist is the mildest that they call me. I think what enabled me over the long run to see what was going on is because where my scholarship lives is the Middle Ages, right? And it's like Chris remembers that I talked about the Virgin Mary. I think that's because you and I were standing by the books, whispering at each other for through somebody else's talking about Mary. I work on scriptural exegesis. I work on the imagery. I work on the story. Figural, if you read Eric Auerbach's Mimesis on the way in which the Old Testament is figuring the New Testament, and that kind of layering of imagery. So, when I started watching Milo, the first thing I saw, and that's why, the sort of the mask imagery and it's like this. If you say this is the letter and behind it's the spirit, or vice versa, right? That you're looking for the symbolism and the meaning. And I've always, from that perspective, it works for Tolkien too. I've always, from that perspective, been a bit out of step with modernity. Now I understand why, right?
Yeah.
And I think, it's not something that happened in 2006. It's not something that happened in 1986, for example, when I graduated from college. It's not something that happened in 1926, when you're in Weimar, Germany, with this, breakdown morals and all the sex experimentation and stuff that I've been reading a lot from Dr. Jones writes about that in some of his other books on libido dominandi and monsters from the id. We are in what I always said is this theological crisis, right? And it definitely goes back to the Enlightenment, and it goes back to the Enlightenment, description of human beings as machines, and this I'm really getting this from Mike Jones' Monsters from the Id, where he's talking about horror and the way in which that you had the French Revolution and then Frankenstein, And there's a very direct relationship between the French Revolution and Mary Shelley's writing Frankenstein. And it's her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, talk about feminism, right? Who goes to Paris in the midst of the revolution and, has, as these English people did, this sort of fantasy version of the liberation that's going to be coming out of the revolution. But of course, that liberation is grounded in philosophical arguments that, like the Marquis de Sade, who says, or La Mettrie, man is machine, right? And if we're all machines, then the sort of coping mechanism they use for that is all this rationalization, right? It's like we can just have as much sex as you want because we're basically machines, and then we're going to philosophize about this. Well, the upshot of all of that is that's wrong, right? Because we're not machines. We our body and soul. And the more you try to lie to yourself about simply being a machine and saying I can have, whatever sexual activities I do, up to and including, killing someone, right?
Right.
The crises that we're in right now, looking at, the pedophilia charges is what Milo got labeled as, right? He supports pedophilia. And it's like, well, because, he'd actually been victimized by someone who abused him when he was 13, or he says 13 or 14, right? He was still a child, obviously. That we're suddenly flip that over, and you have people trying to justify it now, right? It's like it's astonishing that you can have people's reputations destroyed by the same accusation that sometimes the same person will then celebrate, right? And so we're in this incredibly, morally and theologically confused moment, but it's at least as old as, in fact, modernity. And the monsters include Frankenstein, who comes out of Mary Shelley trying to live up to her mother and father's sort of free love dictums by running away with Percy Bysshe Shelley, and therefore he commits adultery against Harriet, his wife, who then kills herself, right? And voila, Frankenstein. We get Dracula. Mike Jones talks about Dracula in the context of syphilis, fears of syphilis, and the contamination of the blood. Gets to Alien, which he says is, the modernity's horror at abortion, right? Women's fertility, and the alien monster is, in the spaceship that's basically female shaped, and they find all the eggs, right? And they can't get rid of the eggs. I mean, the number of times, right? Whatever her name is, Sigourney Weaver's character. I forgot what her name is. Ripley has to try to get rid of the fetus, right? And it just keeps coming back, and she can't kill it, and can't kill it, and can't kill it. And then, by episode, Aliens 3, she has to kill herself because there's nothing left, right? What I'm wondering is zombies, right? And zombies are the aughts, right? It's like we have, whatever happens at the turn of the millennium, the fall of the Twin Towers, and so forth. And we have this sort of rupture in our culture. And the zombie movies, I've been wondering about zombies for ages. And I'm starting to think now, it's like we've sort of people, you feel like this is like, nobody wants to think anymore. Zombies eat your brains. Zombies eat your, and your brain is, this is me. This isn't Mike Jones. I'm making this up as I think go along, right? That zombies eat your brains, which suggests, we're only our physical meat self, right? And zombies are basically literally meat puppets, right? They can't, they have no thoughts anymore. All they can do is brains. But I don't watch horror movies. And clearly horror appeals to people, I think, who can't give up these contradictions. You can't look at it and say, look, adultery is bad. Look, sexual promiscuity, turns you into a vampire, and you're using people for your own, physical satiation. But in fact, you're turning yourself into the undead. I think the zombie problem, you can say 2006, right? That's a peak of zombie.
Right.
Stories and such. We need to figure out what's going on with the zombies. And it's, that what we've all turned into with this COVID crisis is, you can't speak, you can't go outside, you can't do anything because you, by way of doing that, will kill somebody else, right? We're all, by definition, zombies now.
Yeah, those are great thoughts. There's a lot to work with there, Rachel. But Glenn, I'd like to hear if you have anything you'd like to sort of throw in to have Rachel respond to.
The number of things that have just gone flying. But There is somebody who has actually done an analysis of zombies and vampires, where they equate it with politics. So they point out that when Republicans are in charge, vampires are in, because Republicans have this reputation of being sort of aristocratic. Whereas when the Democrats are in, it's the mindless masses.
So zombies.
I don't think it follows through consistently, but I just thought I'd throw that one out there.
Well, the vampires, I mean, being vampiric, there's they have to convert people to being vampires, right? So the sort of sexuality, I'm more persuaded by Jones's sexuality argument that they are, they're not fertile, right? They can't have children because they're dead. And the only way that they can, get more vampires is by sucking. It gets pretty graphic very quickly. You start thinking through. And that is, and that they're appealing. Right? It's, the vampires are elegant and dangerous and sexy and so forth. I mean, with Dracula, it seems to be, it was definitely syphilis, right? Because you can pass it on without, like you can have it and not show symptoms for a while, and the men slept with the prostitutes and pass it on to their innocent wives and so forth. And that happens in Stoker's setup. So I think with the zombies, I mean, it's like yes, the masses definitely fit, but I think, the meat puppets is what I would go to now. It's like this claim that we simply are soulless.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the things that came to mind when you were just talking there, Rachel, when you used the phrase monsters from the id, Forbidden Planet. I don't know if you remember the film Forbidden Planet from the 50s with Leslie Nielsen actually playing a serious character. He's the captain of this spaceship. But that phrase, that monsters from the id, is kind of the heart of the story. But anyway, that's so listeners to the podcast should look up Forbidden Planet with Leslie Nielsen and watch that, and you'll actually get what Rachel is referring to. It's actually an interesting kind of tie-in. But I know we want to talk about Tolkien. I know we want to talk about the Forge of Tolkien.
I want to throw one more thing in, Chris.
Sure.
Not done. I've got another dangerous person that if you don't know her, you need to get to know. It was someone we had on the podcast before, a woman named Moira Grayland Peet. She's the daughter of Marion Zimmer Bradley.
Oh, Vox Day published her book.
Yeah,
it's intense. Yes, no, yeah. Kudos to you. That is a powerful book.
We had Maura on the show, so she's on an earlier episode of the podcast.
Well, now I'm jealous of you.
What I want to suggest is that at a future episode we get both of you on.
Oh, I would love that. I would love that. So Vox Day Unauthorized is the video platform, and you can get to my Forge of Tolkien videos through my Fencing Bear at Prayer blog. And there's a post there that links you to and explains how to subscribe. It's a little tricky. But Vox also has a publishing house called Castelia House, and Castelia published Moira's book, The Last Closet. Yes. Yes. No, that she showed the degree to which her parents, particular mom with the Marion Zimmer Bradley with the Mists of Avalon.
Right.
That's demonic stuff.
Yeah, I grew up in Scientology, and so there's a kind of bohemian, creepy weirdness in my life, in my background, and a lot of folks who are kind of in sort of middle American and growing up in sort of Norman Rockwell-esque environments have this sort of weird fascination with things outside that world, and almost I think that they're easy marks for stuff. And I think that what Marion Zimmer Bradley is about in terms of her work with science fiction, it's kind of like a gateway drug kind of thing. You get into that world of science fiction and fantasy, at least back in the day when it was largely, at least in terms of the published work, relatively wholesome and relatively.
Marion Zimmer Bradley was never wholesome.
Well, I'm not saying that she was, but what happens is when you get there are like 2 or 3 steps to Marion Zimmer Bradley that comes through. So you end up sort of kind of kind of moving from one thing to another, and then you come to her, and the next thing you know, you're in this weird kind of environment. But anyway, that's something.
Pedophilia?
Yeah, right.
No, I mean that's what The Last Closet is, and that Moira had to have her father arrested.
Yeah, right.
When she found him molesting an 11-year-old. It's like she's a courageous woman.
Yeah,
Oh,
and I guess what I was getting at is that he did a lot of this stuff at science fiction conventions.
Mm-hmm.
He was a predator at science fiction conventions back in the day. We're talking 60s, 70s, that kind of thing. So imagine you're a kid that's grown up reading, Ray Bradbury and people like that, from the 50s, and you go to a sci-fi convention and there's this creepy guy working the crowd. I guess that's what I was getting at. But anyway,
that actually matters. And one, it's older than the 50s, right? This is what I've been on quite a journey since 2016, let me tell you. And to see the degree to which, I think Lewis Carroll has some problems, right? The girls that he wrote the Alice stories for, that I'm talking about Tolkien. One of the episodes I did was stories for children, right? And how interesting the critics try to make it out as bad that he's writing for stories for children, and he gets very adamant that he's really not. And you can see him wanting to. I'm worried about how much children's literature is in fact grooming. And it's like Alice in Wonderland there's a way in which you can see it really, it could be grooming there, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you're making these special stories for children. Owen was reading a book that, this is Owen Benjamin on Unauthorized, was reading a book that someone sent him about a boy. It's from the 50s, right? So before space travel, like 58 or 59. And it was about, taking this boy by himself with these adult men, and they're going to go up in the rocket, right? And Owen's just like, being Owen about it's clearly about getting the kids away from their parents, and like he's strapped into the chair, and it's going to rattle and push, and you're on top of this big rocket, and you're just like, okay, fine, I believe it now too.
Right.
The degree to which we are all always having to deal with this kind of evil, it's not new.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not new.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Now, let's get to Tolkien, though. I know that we've kind of gotten into the muck here a bit, and it's important to do that. But I think that one of the things that we can all agree upon, and even the people who hate him can agree, with, is that Tolkien's wholesome. There's a kind of wholesome cleanness to Tolkien. And so you've got the Forge of Tolkien, and I think that by that image you're talking about his creative process. Can you talk a little bit about your video series?
So I've explained that, yes, it's about his creative process. When you watch the series, my cover page has a picture of a little blocks, a building with little blocks, and the outro page is the full picture of it, and that's a forge, right? And they're built with these little stones that I have, these Ankerstein, which are a German, late 19th century German toy, but graduated up to adult level hobby sort of building. And that's meant to sort of symbolize that you're coming here to practice making things with me in the series. And it's grounded in the series that the course that I teach at the University of Chicago. It's called, the course at Chicago is Tolkien, Medieval and Modern. So you see the tension between the medieval and modernity is there. And I've taught that course for 6 times since 2005. It's every 3 years. And that course itself was designed with this project of taking up Tolkien's invitation that he has in the letter to Milton Waldman to, he made this legendarium, and he hoped that other minds and hands would come to it and, bring plays and music and art and so forth. And if you think about, the level of fan fiction, which his family is, I think, sort of ambivalent about, but the amount of, you want something fertile as opposed to sterile, right? All of the work that Tolkien's storytelling has inspired, since the books, the Lord of the Rings came out in the 50s, is, I think, testament to, I mean, the true fertility of his vision, right? And in the course that I teach at the University of Chicago, they get to do a final project, which is either write a paper in scholarly mode or make something, right? And I mean, over the years, I've had such, just like, we had a play, we've had rock operas, we've had lots of cooking, poetry, lots and lots and lots of poetry, Hobbit, stuffed toys, art installations. It's the creativity that Tolkien's world unlocks. I think it has to come from his own theological appreciation of our being made in the image and likeness of a maker, right? And in my the second or third video, the Mythopoeia video, I talk about the poem that he wrote for C.S. Lewis, where he's trying to convince Lewis that myths are productive, fertile, right? And saying, we make still in the image in which we were made. We're made in the image and likeness of a creator, an artist, a maker, and we're called to be artists and makers in that way. And that I see, it's like that's a term for it, right? The Christian imagination, the poetic imagination, the kind of, when Tolkien and Lewis are writing their stories, they're doing it because they say, nobody writes the kinds of stories we like now in modernity. So we're going to have to make our own, right? And we're called to participate in that Christian response of worship and joy and storytelling. So when you look at, what the reason the critics don't like Tolkien's stories is they're not grooming children. Right? They're in fact, the hobbits are children, clearly, right? And in stature, if not, behavior, and Pippin's younger and things like that. But they are, they're resisting that tendency of all modernity to go, follow the Marquis de Sade and make smut and then philosophize about it, right? It's like the critics are always saying that Tolkien doesn't deal with real questions, right? Because he doesn't, and I say now, it's because he doesn't write stories that are intended to corrupt children into being sexualized before they're adults. And conversely, the stories that he writes are all predicated on fertility, family lineages, creating families. The great hero of the Lord of the Rings is Sam, who gets to go, he resists the ring because all he wants is his own little garden. Right. And two, he gets to go home and have a family and plant trees in the Shire. And so when people respond to Tolkien as being wholesome like that, it's like, it's not that there's not difficulty that they go through, that Sam and Frodo obviously have to survive the trenches, right? Not necessarily a wholesome place to be, but they, the whole feel of Middle Earth and the whole feel of Tolkien storytelling is redemptive in that sense. It's like saying what's magic is not, power over creation, or, the wizard, like the kind of being able to say a spell and force other people to do your will. What's magic is making beautiful things.
Yeah, that's marvelous. And of course, there's this puzzlement that, say, for example, the elves, or Galadriel in particular, have when hobbits will say, "I'd like to see some elf magic," and she's like, "Well, I'm not really sure what you're talking about, but I guess this will do." This is Galadriel's magic for you.
I can show you things in a mirror, right? Right. Which is interpretation. Yeah, no, and exactly that most of the things that the mortals look at the elves making as magical, as far as the elves are concerned, it's just their love of the elements that they're working with.
Well, that's it. It's elemental, and there's a sense in which there's something being brought to the surface that they can see that's latent in this stuff. That's part of its essence. And I think that this kind of gets into Tolkien.
Out, Chris.
What's that? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's this something elemental going on in Tolkien where it's very, I think, Aristotelian. Of course, there's a sense in which there's a latency or potentiality in things that the elves can see and they bring to the surface. So they don't think that they're actually introducing anything, and they're not coercing things into other things like Sauron and Saruman. they're trying to preserve. You know, when you think about the three elven rings are, you know, by their nature, designed to preserve the goodness of things. But anyway, I want to get into Bombadil, though. You know, I saw that you. One of the things that prompted this was I saw your comment that Bombadil was like your second least favorite thing about Tolkien.
I didn't say that.
Well, maybe I'm sorry if I'm putting words in
You
your mouth.
are. That was one of my Facebook friends. I think
okay.
said
Well,
that.
then
I think Bombadil's absolutely key to the whole thing.
Oh, good. So we're on the same page. So tell us what you think about Tolkien or about Bombadil.
Okay, so I realized with the Forge of Tolkien, the series up to this point is still sort of giving you the elements of creation, as it were. I'm not yet deep into the stories, but Bombadil's, I think, episode 4, is very important because if you, it's like, could you leave him out of the movie? You know, he was left out of the movies because he's, quote, not essential, right? But he is... He's this is giving my episode away a little bit, but he's the one who tells the hobbits the story that they're in, right? So you could say he is. I think most of Tolkien, you're saying he's Aristotelian. I think he's very Augustinian always, which is why he likes history. Tolkien likes history so much because he wants us to see our lives in history as in the way that Augustine describes it on Catechizing the Uninstructed, that when you're catechizing, you are showing the catechumens the story that they are a part of, right? Mm-hmm. That's what Bombadil does, and you remember the scene that always just gives me chills to get to read. There's two of them. The Field of Cormallen is one, when Sam and Frodo are there and they're being honored, and the bard comes and is going to sing the song of Frodo and Nine-Fingered Frodo and the Ring of Doom, right? And Sam bursts into tears, right, because he's there in the story, right? They've been talking about that when they're on the stairs of Cirith Ungol, about how they figured out that they're in the same story still. That's the story that Bombadil told them, right? And you get some of it when Aragorn sings to them on Weathertop of Beren and Luthien, right? And you get another little bit of it when Bilbo sings at Rivendell about Arundel. But if you read the Bombadil episode carefully, it's basically a baptism, right? They enter into the Old Forest, which is stepping out of the Shire, so they've left their own primary reality. And they've stepped into the Old Forest, and they have to go through the gate that Mary knows, and they find themselves suddenly not in the Shire anymore. They're in Fairy, right?
Yeah,
in Tolkien's understanding. You're going to use this in your book, right? You will credit me, right? I think some of this I'm getting from Jane Chance, but I've been talking through this for so many years with my students that I'm not entirely clear where all of it came from sometimes, right? Whether it was Tolkien originally or whether it's me layering it on from my own experience, but they come into the Old Forest, and Tom rescues them from being eaten by the tree, right? And then the next day they can't go out because it's Goldberry's washing day, right? So it's water, right? It's raining. Everything's raining. She's washing the world clean with her rain, right? And because she's a river daughter, and Tom uses that time to tell them stories, right? And they lose the sense of how long they've been in the story. It's like a page or so, but he basically gives them the whole history of Middle Earth back to the time when the elves wake up, and he was there before, and they find themselves as if enchanted, right?
Yeah, right.
The magic that happens in the story is all falling under the enchantment of song, right? And if you think about the Ainulindale, it's the song of creation, right? So, and Tom can only speak in song. Basically, everything he talks in is like they don't know whether they're speaking or singing anymore. So they've fallen into the harmony of being part of the ordered creation. And Tom shows them who they are, right? And they're washed clean. Among other things, they keep getting in water, right? They've fallen in the river. He drags them out of the river from the tree, and then he tells them stories on Goldberry's washing day, and then they're all washed clean, and now they belong to the story, right? And there's also a dream element there, which I haven't I haven't completely unpacked in my episodes. The one that I posted today, Falling Wide Asleep, is about that problem of, sort of dreaming as a time travel technique, which the hobbits do in Tom Bombadil's house. But reread the chapters again, right? You realize how much is all packed in there, that without Tom there, they aren't who they are, right? They don't know who they are, and they don't know the story they're in. They're going to find out more about it as they go along, right? Which is what it's like living as a Christian, right? You continually find yourself yet again in the same story. But it's Tom. I mean, Gandalf has given Frodo a history of the ring, right, back in the Shire. But Tom brings them into this whole sort of enchanted understanding of their real place in fairy. Right. He's absolutely essential. It's ridiculous that you can think that you can have this story without him.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. There are a couple of things that you've introduced here that I hadn't thought about. One was the baptism element. I hadn't thought about Goldberry's washing day as baptismal. Mm-hmm. And I think that's great. I agree with you. And the idea of there being kind of introduced to the larger story, and really it's kind of a Genesis thing, because he takes them back to the beginning. He takes them, he shows them that this goes all the way back. And he in an offhanded way, he actually talks about when the darkness wasn't fearsome, and before the Dark Lord came from the outside and enters into the creation. He remembers even that time. But yeah, that's great. That's great stuff. I think what came to mind is something I did think about it somewhat, is that the dream element. When Frodo is asleep, he has this dream, which is revisited when he's going to the uttermost west. When he's on the ship that's taking him to Valar, the uttermost west. Bombadil's referenced right at that point, where there's like this curtain of water, this rain, and he passes out of it, and then Tolkien tells you this is the dream. This is the dream he had at the start in Bombadil's house. So there are places in Lord of the Rings where Bombadil is referred to, and it's kind of catches by surprise, but it kind of shows you exactly what you say, how integral Bombadil is to the entire story. How you can't really get the story if you don't have that episode with Bombadil, which everybody thinks, as you noted, can be sacrificed.
Right, because it doesn't seem to drive the action, but it frames it. It gives it its meaning, and everything that the hobbits learn subsequently has to. When Bombadil tells the story, they don't really understand it, so it's just sort of colors and shapes, and sheep on a hill, and kings, and it's all very vague. Right. But as you say, it goes back to creation, and it's like it's everything that should happen at baptism, right? And you think about, one of the bigger projects that I'm trying to get myself sort of launched on. And my building project is one. I've been playing with those blocks all summer. I've also been writing poetry with a group that I have in a chat on Telegram. We're the Dragon Common Room, and we're writing a long satire on the centrisms, right? The sort of political problem, modeled on Alexander Pope's Dunciad. So we're doing this sort of multiple layering of which story we're in, and so forth. And now I forgot what I was talking about, because I wanted to tell you about the poetry. Finding ourselves in the story.
Creation.
Baptism.
Oh, the liturgy. Right. And one of the things that I want to get myself to read over the next year is Guéranger's liturgical year, right? The baptism happens properly in the medieval practice at the Easter Vigil, right? What do you do at the Easter Vigil? You read the stories, right? And you start with creation, and you go through various of the prophecies, the Ark, the Noah's Ark, and the dry bones in Ezekiel, and so forth. And so that it's a baptism. It's like they're in the darkness, and he tells them that story in the midst of the water. And there's got to be candle imagery. There's candle imagery. Yes, there's candle imagery in there too, because when they first see Goldberry sitting in her chair, right, she's surrounded by pots of plants, right, water plants, and candles.
Right.
It's all a font. And the thing is that with as once Tolkien was going back to Mass, I think there were some years when he wasn't attending, but once he's going to Mass daily, he's going to be in that liturgical cycle. There's all those like little Easter eggs, right? Like they leave Rivendell on December 25th, and the fall is on March 25th.
Right,
which is Lady Day, which is
Right.
the day of recreation and the Good Friday and all these things. Whether he means it to be allegorical, it's definitely liturgical. Always.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would talk about analogical, but liturgical. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Analogical too, but the liturgical symbolism is going to be there in the matter, right?
Yeah.
And the storytelling.
Right. Yeah, I want to give these guys a chance to ask a couple of questions. And one of the things that I'd like to see you respond to is the episode with the Barrow Wight. Now, what you have there is very much a kind of vision, I think, of final judgment, and you've got the resurrection. When Frodo sings that little ditty, and Bombadil immediately appears.
Mm-hmm.
The stones roll away, we're told, and then Bombadil's head appears in the opening with its feather and everything, and the sun is actually rising behind his head. And then he goes in and he casts the Barrow Wight into the outer darkness, and you hear the wail of the Barrow Wight as he's cast out, and then the hobbits come out and run naked in the grass. There's this whole kind of marvelous...
I think my baptismal imagery works there too.
now I want to go to the Harrowing of Hell.
Okay.
That's what that always made me think of. Christ going to preach to the spirits who are in prison.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And the declaration to Satan that he's lost.
Uh-huh.
And the redemption of the people who have gone before.
Yeah.
That was what that always made me think of.
Yeah.
Well, it works with, we're baptized into Christ's death, right?
Right. That's true too.
So I think the death imagery works, and the nakedness.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, I don't actually talk about the Barrow Wight. In my Bombadil episode, I mainly talk about the storytelling part. But I when you were retelling that with the Barrow Wights, I can see other ways in which it fits the baptismal liturgy as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I think that's right. I think it's good. I agree with you. Tom, do you have any thoughts?
And the thing is, the Harrowing of Hell is going to fit there too, because of course, if you're having baptism at the Easter Vigil, that's before the resurrection, right? So that's when Christ is in hell. So the sort of enfolding of time, it liturgically is going to be happening in Tolkien stories too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's rich stuff. Tom, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah. Maybe on the realm of kind of theological history and the way it expresses itself at that time. And I don't remember, because I don't remember exactly what they were dealing with specifically theologically, but I do know that it would have been in the air, that the doctrine of creation, because it had been for a long time, had started to really lose the kind of character and grip it had with medieval Christianity, for example, forms, orders of being. And there was a very strong emphasis, especially in the time with Tolkien and Lewis, especially out of Germany and different places, on redemptive history. But oftentimes redemption was read in very Gnostic ways, in which it was a liberation from, like we see today, liberation from something and freedom, but it was detached from created being, order, kinds, fulfillment. And I don't know that their stories were meant to address that, but at least they definitely were representing a fuller, I think, Catholic Christian vision or Orthodox Christian vision that creation and redemption are to be held together, and creation has a form, order, and end. And in a way, it's very prophetic literature, if you will, or scripture commentary in a literary form, because it is articulating a more consistent understanding of Christian creation redeemed than a lot of the theological world was offering, and both not only Protestantism, but even Catholicism for a long time. I don't know if that's worth engaging, but it's something I
No,
noticed.
I agree utterly. I think that's, I mean, that both Tolkien and Lewis are very concerned with the imagery of creation, and that Tolkien writes his creations during the Ainulindale, and Lewis includes, I mean, both the Space Trilogy and Narnia have deep, creational elements in them.
Yeah.
And so when you were talking, I was thinking, that actually, that's, I thank you. I need to think more on that. It's sort of the theological climate that they were writing in. I mean, one of the things I thought you were going to go to was, of course, in the early evolution as a replacement myth, right?
Yes.
And Lewis does have that one little great essay on how evolution is the myth of modernity. And both he and Tolkien would be very much against that, because not maybe evolution is a mechanism, although my friend Vox has done some interesting live streams on how the mathematics don't work, which is worth playing out. But we're gonna win, right? Creation's real. And so Tolkien and Lewis are trying to do it artistically, but they mean it also, sort of biologically and genetically, I think. Right. It's like where do we come from as creatures?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that one of the problems, of course, and you're probably familiar with this from your childhood, Rachel, is there's a kind of Gnostic a Gnostic air to much of evangelical Protestantism. There's really no use for creation. They really do think it's all just going to burn and be, so how do you invest yourself into something that's just going to be ashes? There's a sense in which, creation, because it's lost its, is sort of we've lost the thing that's redeemed. We've redeemed, within evangelical Christianity, souls are redeemed, but bodies are not. I can't tell you the number of evangelicals I've come across who have no problem with cremation, for example. I mean, they just think that the body is just some kind of, I guess, waste paper that is thrown away at the end of the day. And they don't see how the rest of creation ties into the redemption as well. I don't know how they read Romans 8 without having a sense that this is a very big redemption, not just them.
What's the thing that they always talk about? What's the great hope? It's to go to heaven.
Right.
Which is not scriptural.
Right.
The new heavens and new earth.
Right.
The new earth is the thing that where we're going to be living. So,
I think even when they
right there.
But I even think when they talk about that, they're thinking about a full replacement. It's kind of like the new model. It's not as though the thing that has been redeemed, but it's kind of the replacement. Now you can throw that other one away, and we get a brand new one. I think that's how a lot of evangelicals think.
I think a lot of them don't even think about the new earth. It's just,
I agree. That's right. I think you're
dry
right.
ice and sheets.
Right. Anyway, this is great stuff, Rachel. Is there anything else you wanted to kind of? I love the liturgical element. I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about the church calendar. It's obvious now that you've mentioned it. The dates, particularly. I guess that's part of what it means. I guess that's what happens to you when you're Presbyterian and you're not tied into the liturgical calendar.
Well, so I'd say yes, of the variety of things that having to take this sabbatical from real life has given us. Although whether maybe it's like we were, the end of the world came in March 2020. That I've been watching Mass daily. St. John Cantius is served by regular canons here in Chicago, and they've actually had me come and talk about Mary among other things. But they've been live streaming their Mass every day, and so before that I was a Sunday Catholic, and I guess I'm still just sort of an online Catholic. But being able to watch Mass every day and actually, like, I know that it's the feast of St. Michael the Archangel today, in a way that I simply wouldn't have even last year, even though I know the dates.
Right.
And instead of structuring your life around secular time, structure it on liturgical time. Right. This has been a very important, I think, training for me to be able to say what is it like to praise God daily every morning with the Mass, and when it's physical, but it's not physical because I'm just watching it on my phone, right? Walking around outside in my backyard, but it's still, you know, it's not embodied in the way it's supposed to be. But at least the time is now structured, you know, symbolically as it should be, with the remembrance of the saints and the remembrance of the other feasts, and you know, closer. We're never living in the Middle Ages, but to appreciate the aesthetic and imaginative and intellectual and devotional structure that they built those cathedrals out of.
Right. Yeah, I think this is an important thing to say. Our show has a pretty wide range of people who listen to it. You know, we have traditionalist Catholics, and we have very kind of neo-Puritan Reformed people, and so forth. So, if nothing less, you know what you've told us is that you really can't understand Tolkien, who was a Roman Catholic, without the liturgical calendar. And I think that seems undeniable to me.
And one actually can't understand the liturgical calendar without understanding Genesis, but one cannot understand Genesis without understanding the liturgical calendar, because the rhythms, the kinds, the orders of being are what are the agricultural pattern, and everything else is tied together. And you know, even though Reformed have it in a loose way, they still order their calendar is very much, you know, indirectly tied to that. You can't. Those things are connected, and that's the rhythm of creation, is the ordering, the kinds, the being that is given in Genesis, the agricultural, the settings of times, the hours, the days, the cycle, right? I mean, all these things pattern the created order, which pattern the liturgical cycle, and is, you know, I think these people had, you know, Tolkien in particular, they had an insight into that, you know, many of us are just discovering.
Right. Anyway, so Glenn, do you have anything? We probably should start wrapping up. I think we're at about, you know, the time that we normally bring this into a landing here, as we've been flying along. But Glenn, do you have any thoughts or questions for Rachel at this point?
Well, I'd actually like to have a longer conversation with you about what the heck is going on in medieval history.
I don't know. I'm building with blocks and writing poems and, you know, telling stories.
You know, from where I'm looking at it, I mean, I did a lot of work in medieval, but I got my doctorate in '92. And I'm an early modernist, but I haven't really been working as closely in that as one might expect. And I'm just looking at some of the stuff that's emerging out of medieval historians right now, and kind of scratching my head and saying, where did that come from? So at some point, maybe I'd like to have a conversation with you about that.
Yes, that's another conversation.
Yeah, totally different.
Yeah.
So Tom, anything you want to say as we wrap up?
No, thank you. That's all I can say for joining us. Nice to meet virtually in person, if that's even a category now. I don't make sense of that, but it's one step closer to the pub, maybe.
Right.
That's good.
Do you travel at all, Rachel? You get out to New England at all at any point? Maybe we can do this.
Not accidentally. No, but I mean, I was out in New York in June, New York City, when Milo had me on his show to talk about the statue problem.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah, but
yeah. Well, you know, it. Anytime you think that you'll be in the area, you know, maybe we can bring you out for something. It'd be a lot of fun to do something in person. But you know, as we wrap up, you know, I just want, you know, we'll put some links in the show notes to some different things. Obviously, to the Forge of Tolkien, but also maybe to your blog. Is that something that you'd like? And the book?
In the book.
That book?
Yeah. So the Forge of Tolkien is on unauthorized TV, and the subscription process is a little cumbersome. You subscribe, and then they have to send you an access code. And then you log in on the actual video site, which is not unauthorized.tv. It's a different address, but they have to give you the access code. My book on Milo's and my adventures 2016-2019 is available through Castelia House. If we could put that link up, that would be great. And then my blog has continuing adventures with Milo on Telegram and his chat over the last year or so. But since May, talking about the poetry project that my friends and I are engaged in as well. If you're curious what we're doing with Alexander Pope.
Yeah. I think we have a lot of people with a wide range of interests who listen to the show, and I think that there's some folks out there who'd love to know more about that. Anyway, well, thank you very much, Rachel. We really appreciate you being on the show and taking the time to do this. And we wish you all the best with the Forge and the book and all your other stuff.
Thank you, Chris.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for listening to the Theology Pugcast, folks. We appreciate your interest in the things that we talk about, and we'll be with you again next week. And next week, Glenn will be back from Nashville. He's going down to speak at the Fight, Laugh, Feast Network conference, and we're looking forward to a report, Glenn, on how that all went and whether or not you guys got arrested. Okay.
We'll do our best.
That's a good way to get the rest of us to tune back in.
That's right.
That's right. All right. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.